Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it's sort of setting up our intention from the point of view of like why are we doing this thing? And that we all have different perspectives and different approaches, different interests, and so there's something kind of cool about us talking together. Isn't just a bunch of friends just shit talking. That it's going to be like we're
With
all
purpose.
contributing something in a certain way, like a perspective to look at the Enneagram in a much more dynamic fashion than fucking church talk.
That's true.
Which is the first conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, all that fun stuff.
Like, how do I introduce myself? What am I? I don't even...
The Big Hormone Enneagram.
Last session we had, we talked about the importance of typing, and part of the milieu or the constellation of what we touched on was how do you say it, David? It's something about like not bringing keeping the sunlight and the midnight or whatever to the Enneagram, like not turning the Enneagram all into just sunlight.
Yeah, the shadow.
Yeah, and what does that mean? And what is the point of keeping it in the mix? What is the point of is it to make something just feel edgy, or is there what is the real value of it? And how do you talk, for example, about a healthy 5, healthy 4, or whatever, without it being a sort of a redemptive sunlight journey?
Well, do we want to do
the introductions?
Yeah, like an introduction. We can clip it out. And,
Who wants to start?
I'll go first.
All right. So I guess we're starting the podcast now.
All right, guys. My name is Emeka, and I got into the Enneagram over a decade ago because I've always been interested in different typologies since I was a kid. And someday I just stumbled upon some Enneagram symbols that I didn't understand, and I started looking at articles, and it opened up this whole new world for me. I thought it was going to be like a short-term hobby, like most things that I get into, but it's just become part of me, part of the way I think and part of the way I see the world. So my type is 8, and the thing that hooked me initially into the Enneagram was this idea that types weren't just sort of a made-up typology, that it was a real thing that I could observe and I could feel with my body, and that types could it was a thing that I could watch people do. Like this little kernel of a psychological driver was a much bigger thing that I could watch on a video. And so I got really obsessed with figuring out what the types were like, and typing was like the biggest hook for me, which eventually led to trying to figure out a way to map out what the instincts were like, how to recognize what people's instincts were, which became this whole collage typing thing, or collage exercise, which is a Gestalt approach to typing instincts. And that became sort of a big thing on Facebook forums, collage typing and video typing. And it's become this really interesting thing, interesting orientation to the Enneagram for me. And yeah, what else is there to say?
Not much. You nailed it.
Did I do the social thing correctly?
You never do the social thing correctly.
Yeah. Good to
know. So I guess I'll go. I'm Nancy. I am a type 3 self-pres, and I got into the Enneagram when I was 16, and my mom took my whole family to an Enneagram class because she wanted us to communicate better. So we just started studying it together, just me and my mom, and it really helped me kind of put words to emotions when I was younger, and it gave me kind of a healthy way to express what was going on inside of me and just kind of have a space to talk about things. So I really took to it because I just am really interested in psychology and self-help, and I found a lot of help in it. So I am looking to kind of spread the love, I guess. And I have been trained as a coactive coach and also gone to the narrative Enneagram training. And I'm kind of looking to marry those together in the future. But I also just really enjoy kind of spreading the Enneagram truth, what it actually is about. So that's why I'm here.
I'm David. Type 9, self-pres sexual 974 tri-type. Got into the Enneagram about 30 years ago. I was in a band, and the woman who was our drummer was into the Enneagram, brought it up when I was talking about numerology one day, and I just caught on fire with it and read everything that was out at that time. Mostly got into the Russo stuff, and my approach is pretty, archetypal Jungian approach to the Enneagram, into symbols and metaphors and things like that. And I, about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, noticed some correlations between the instincts and the instinctual stackings and this ancient Buddhist symbol called the Bhava Chakra. And so I've made some elaborative connections, symbolic connections between that symbol, and that's kind of opened up a lot of other insights into the Enneagram types as well, because there's interesting ways that it all connects and they overlap, and we'll get into that as we move along in the podcast, I guess. I think that's about it for now.
I'm John, and I blew my nose during David's introduction because I thought my mic was muted.
It was not.
It was not. So I'm John Luckovich. I was introduced to the Enneagram over 10 years ago in high school when I was on a camping trip with some friends of mine. And one of these friends, Mary Cloud, her dad had been friends with Don Riso when they were in the Jesuits together, and helped Don Riso sort of develop some of the descriptions for the types way back. And so I was in this camping trip, and she for school, and she said, "John, you're a 4." And I asked her what that was, and she explained, and I was horrified because, being a 4, you think that you are, and you want to be unique and unlike anything else. And here was a description that, I fit perfectly. And I recognize that there must be hundreds of millions of people exactly like me that could just be of a description that was just in some fucking book somewhere. So that horrified me, and it made me want to find out what was I that wasn't just something that fit into a description. And so my interest in the Enneagram went to the Gurdjieff work and a lot of the mystical tradition that the Enneagram emerges from, the fourth way, but also traces in throughout history, especially ancient Egypt. And I've been particularly interested in writing a book that's almost finished on the instinctual drives. And so I I work in the Enneagram from the point of view that I work for Russ doing being an assistant, and I also teach. But part of why we are starting this podcast, the Big Hormone Enneagram, is because everybody on this call, at least from my point of view, has something original and interesting and important to contribute to the understanding of the Enneagram, especially as the Enneagram is getting really popular. There is a lot of poor understanding that gets circulated because people generally get their first impression of the Enneagram through sound bites and through easily digestible information, which is understandable and normal, and how a lot of people learn it at first. But sometimes those little helpful indicators outlive their usefulness, and so there is a lot of not just getting the Enneagram wrong or confused or vague, but there's a way in which, in the lens of different kinds of self-help things and different kinds of inner work tools, sometimes get this brought into being something more positive or more acceptable or palatable, and less potent and less representative of a actual mandala of light and dark, sunlight and nighttime, than they ought to be. And so part of what I really appreciate about the four of us is that when we discuss the Enneagram and topics related to it, that there is this view of that retains a lot of the different perspectives that aren't. There's no compulsion or need to try to make things look better than they are, because when it comes to inner work, when it comes to self-understanding, it does us no favors to see ourselves as more healthy or more present or more awake than we actually are. What actually helps anybody grow and develop is accepting and seeing their own limitations and getting a realistic view of oneself rather than prematurely congratulating oneself on your premature enlightenment. So David, Emeka, and Nancy all have unique perspectives and very interesting insights on the Enneagram and in the process of understanding type, and not just in but other people and the Enneagram as a whole. And I appreciate all of our senses of humor, and that we all seem to share an understanding of inner work and self-improvement and all that kind of shit is not at the expense of humor. It's not at the expense of being irreverent. It's not at the expense of, it doesn't come with what in you call it work face. In like in the Gurge of Work, we talk about people who adopt a certain kind of persona that fits with the cultural milieu. And you could take that for any kind of tradition. You could, in Christianity, it's this, there's a particular kind of Christian face that's like how you want to be seen. And in like yoga, not namaste, that kind of open and new agey light and whatever. In the Gurge of Work, it's a little bit more severe and intense. But with the Enneagram, it can be so kind of positive. And isn't this a beautiful redemptive journey that we're all on? That sometimes there is a way of neglecting a real confrontation with what it means to be trapped within the prison of an Enneagram type, and that can often encourage this kind of view of oneself as really overcoming your sleep. And it's like you're awakening, aren't you? And you're awakening, aren't you? And you're awakening, right? That I think can really gloss over and neglect the kind of the potency and the real effective, real use of the Enneagram, of seeing oneself as you are, where you are, and not just accepting it like passively, but using that as a way to take the next steps for whatever path you're on. Hopefully that covers why the hell we started this. Is it, any other voices?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, it's good.
basically, we're not boring, uninteresting people, and we care that the Enneagram is real and not just some frou-frou, new age, spiritual, positive bullshit, but we want to integrate the dark and the light because that's what's real.
And
Yeah,
relative to sort of the Christian movement that's coming up around the Enneagram, we're wanting to keep some of the reverence for depth and dark and not glossing over, too quickly into the sunlight, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
part of the like my point of view of the Enneagram is that it really is based in essence, and essence requires personality and vice versa. And sometimes that can mean when people are trying to undertake inner work, they can mistake that to mean that essence and personality are opposed to each other, or that one's personality should be something that we fight against, or should not be expressed in a certain way. And really, essence and personality need to go together. And that means not squashing your personality. And that means not having no personality from the point of view of not having humor and, all the facets that make a person interesting. It's that you don't have to flatten the psyche in order to also hold kind of a higher view of things, if that makes sense.
You can have them in tandem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was typing. And from the point of view of, you listen to a lot of Enneagram podcasts, and they're like, let's interview a type 2 today and get their point of view, which is fine, and that's how people learn. But what is the value of understanding your type and actually seeing your type versus, most people mistype, but a lot of times we get very touchy and identified with the type that we think we are. And we get very easy to feel offended or attacked when somebody offers a different point of view from the first impression we have of our type or our understanding of a different type than ourselves. And so, again, another thing I appreciate about everybody on this call is that there is a real attitude of inquiry and a real attitude of trying to see past first, second, third impressions and taking in new information. And what I have found in my years of doing a lot of workshops and online discussions and both, all over the place, is that people tend to stick with their first impression of a type or their own type or their first impression of themselves. And maybe their view of themselves is like outdated by like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what does it mean to actually undertake the process of deconstructing what you think you already know to find something new?
Yeah, if I could speak to that. I started out thinking I was a 4, as many, many, many people do.
Yay!
Especially if you've ever been depressed. Everybody that's been depressed just thinks they're a 4. So I started out thinking I was a 4, and when this group of people came to me and were like, "You're not a 4, you're a 3, and here's why," it was really painful, and I did not appreciate it. But I was in a place where I was able to say, "Look, I'm not ready to hear this." And I kind of circled back around a few months later and was able to just have a one-on-one call with David, and he kind of gave me so many facts about it that I couldn't say no. I was like, "Okay, I'm very much a 3." But
Gave
it
you the
is
gentle 9 delivery.
He did. He gave me the gentle 9 delivery, which I
The
very
sweet
much appreciate. This succulent voice that we all love. And it has served me so much more knowing I'm a 3. In all the workshops that I've gone to as a 3, owning my 3-ness, I have learned so much more about myself and grown so much more instead of just thinking, "Oh, I have deep feelings and I'm a 4, I'm just going to sit here and sulk."
So can you say more about what you learned? And also, like, I think for some people, especially, since you brought up that a lot of people do see themselves as a 4 initially, um, my perception as a 4 seeing people identify as a 4, there can be what it seems to me is that they feel like typing as a 4 either gives them permission to feel a lot, or it makes them feel that they do have deep feelings, and maybe there was some kind of insecurity that maybe my feelings aren't that deep or something. Um, as a 4, I don't think other people have less deep feelings than me, which is a whole topic we could get into of feelings. But Nancy, like, I know that you are a very sensitive person. And so, how does seeing yourself as a 3 change your view of yourself, especially from the point of view of how when I'm speaking to you in the sense of how sometimes typing as a 4 helps people, I think, own some of the complexity of their life.
Yeah, when I first typed, I was 16, so it definitely gave me kind of the freedom as a mistyped 4 to be all in my emotions and depressed. But I think that was partially because the other types were not as described as emotionally deep as a 4 is, like you said. So that was part of it. But now, as a 3, what I've gotten from it, to use a story, I went to the narrative training, and I knew I was a 3. This was over the summer, and I was on the 3 panel, and we did a guided meditation with Helen Palmer, which was awesome. And she started talking about how 3s have this person that they view as basically like God, and they want to be that person. And inevitably, it's a different human, so you can't be that person. And I had this full body reaction, like broke down sobbing in front of like 35 people on this, guided meditation in front of the whole class. And it really opened up a lot of information, just physical information that I had been withholding from myself, and kind of getting me back in touch with my heart, because a lot of 3s are kind of out of touch with their heart. So once I got back in touch with my heart, the days after that were super uncomfortable, but super important, because I got a lot of information from it.
So can you say more about how you experienced your heart, when, like, how you related to the experience of your heart through the lens of 4 versus 3? Because, like I said, I know you're a sensitive person regardless of your type. And so what was helpful about these different lenses?
That's a good question. So when I thought I was a 4, um, it gave me the chance to be withdrawn and have an explanation for it. I am a 369 tri-type, so I am a more withdrawn 3, basically the Eeyore of 3s. But the 4 gave that's how I introduce myself. I'm the Eeyore of 3s. Um, but the 4 gave me this kind of space to say, "Oh, I'm a 4. I'm going to be withdrawn now, and I'm going to have my emotions and have my feelings."
So it's like a
Whereas,
way to reclaim feeling in a way that maybe you hadn't felt otherwise?
correct, yeah. So it's yeah. So it's just kind of I was allowed to feel it, because everyone was like, "Oh, you're a 4. It's okay. You can be withdrawn in the corner."
It also makes um, the 3 going to 9 position, the natural line that 3 has to 9. It sort of is maybe justifies it, if you will. That withdrawn sort of collapse, maybe.
Yeah.
That happens for 3 going to 9. 4 then maybe animates that and makes it more of a in a certain way, uh, I don't know, a more acceptable picture, perhaps. I don't know, or a justification.
Like, gets past the 3 super ego of
Mhm.
needing to 3 out, that you can give yourself permission to be more internal. Is that the case?
Yeah, so I think the biggest part of it is me thinking I'm not a good enough 3, because I'm
Mhm.
not successful and rich and
Mm.
famous and constantly working. And so it kind of gave me an out. Whereas the 3 kind of being typed as a 3 was really scary, because then I had to face the fact that I thought I wasn't good enough. Whereas the 4 was just like, oh, you can just kind of feel your feelings in your heart center and just be withdrawn. Whereas typing as a 3, the real emotion behind it was, I'm not good enough. That's a big emotion to feel, and nobody likes to feel that. So
4 means you can be a failure.
right, 4 you can be a failure all you want, because it's
hell yeah,
worse.
hell yeah. So do you feel like, knowing this though, that you're able to bring more of that self-acceptance to the 3 space?
I don't know if I'm quite to self-acceptance yet.
Mm-hmm.
I am at times. I can definitely understand what's happening in my head more. Um, I can voice things that are happening, which doesn't necessarily mean I accept what's happening. It just means I have words for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Emeka or David, did you mistype?
I mistyped for like 6 months. Mine was pretty straightforward because I'm an 8-wing 7, which there's not a whole lot of opportunities to mistype when you're double assertive that way. I just thought
Or
I was,
Emeka.
And social last.
yeah. I thought I was 7-wing 8 for like 6 months, and then I learned about centers. I will admit though, initially when I first read the 8 description, I was like, this is terrible. My dad is also an 8, and I remember growing up, even before I found out about the Enneagram, I knew on some level that I didn't want to be as big of an asshole as I thought he was. So there was a conscious effort to learn about typology and try to figure out how I could work on myself or get some kind of awareness so I wouldn't turn out exactly that way. And so learning about the Enneagram and seeing type 8 on paper, I was just like, that's terrible. And it took some time for me to see how I did have some of those same qualities that my dad had. And even though we were very different, but it really informed a lot of my family dynamics, because there's 3 8s in my family, and my family's pretty,
Jeez.
yeah, we're pretty assertive. And for a long time, I just couldn't figure out what was, I don't want to say wrong with me, but like the way that my family talks to each other is not the way most normal people talk to each other. And so there was an adjustments period to realize that I was really doing this 8 thing that I took for granted in the way that I address people, and to see that there's all this force that I was expelling that I didn't realize. So it was a kind of a huge wake up call in a way that I was really doing the thing that I kind of knew I shouldn't be doing, which is really, really pushing and forcing things a little too much.
I hear that a lot from 8s that get into the Enneagram, is they're wondering why people are having these reactions to them, and then when they learn about the Enneagram, then it starts to make sense.
Yeah, that was a huge awakening for me, kind of coming around to 8 and seeing all the different ways that I push so much. And I think I sort of made a resolution with myself a long time ago that I never ever have to make any sort of effort to push. It's going to happen anyway. But I should never, if I should do anything, like try to go the other direction, because I'm always going to end up doing this on some level. Like that's just what my personality is going to end up doing. So over the years, I've noticed that my friends have noticed that I've softened up. I think as I've gotten more self-awareness, I think my personality has relaxed a little bit more. Maybe it's just getting older, who knows? But I feel like as I've learned a little bit more about my 8-ness, there are situations where I'm noticing how I don't push as much as I used to. I think I was much more of a bigger dick 10, 15 years ago. 100%.
Your dad's an 8, and then you have a sister that's an 8 and a sister that's a 3, right? And then your mom's
yeah. My mom's a 2.
Oh my God.
So like that's 2s. I mean, can be fucking intense.
Oh yeah.
She's an intense 2 as well. Like I think she's like a 268 or a 261, one of those. So she can hold her own, and like if like a Thanksgiving or whatever, or Christmas, and we're all at the table, it just gets heated. It doesn't even seem like it gets heated, because that's just the way we all talk. And you guys think I'm like pretty easygoing, but you get like one of my sisters around, like just us around, you will see me in a completely different light.
Are there any Nigerian holidays that we can crash your place?
Yeah.
Please.
I should have gotten my sister to meet y'all when you guys were here, because that would have been fun. Because I don't even, it's not even a conscious thing that I do. Like, she just comes around and we just get talking and we just start arguing about regular stuff, and it's completely normal. But to everyone else, we are fighting. And it's like, I've learned not to do that around most other people, but whenever I'm with my family, that's just the way we talk, and you won't see that side of me unless like we get into some kind of heated debate that I really care about, which is not pretty rare with most normal people. But anyway, that was I think the other parts of my typing were much more significant for me than the 8. Like, the instinct stuff was major because I was trying to figure that out for a long time, and I thought that was going to be a life changer, and it was, because I didn't really understand what the hell sexual first was. The literature was garbage, and one-to-one wasn't making any sense to me. One thing I should say is that a lot of people get into the Enneagram and they start reading a whole bunch of books and articles, and I did some of that. But a lot of my learning is, as a body type, has always been experiential. I'm like that kid in class who learns the most by doing a project, like a very difficult project that I don't know if I can do, but because I have to figure things out along the way, I basically learn things because I need to know them. So I'll pick up a book, but I won't read the whole book. I'll just read the part that I need to get what I need to get done. So I learned the Enneagram through typing. So I would be curious about a certain type or figuring out a certain person in my life, and I would think that they were a certain type, and I'd start reading about that type. But I wouldn't read anything unless I was trying to I was trying to get something done. So my Enneagram journey has been very experiential in that way. Like, I've learned because I was trying to type myself or type others, which eventually came to like, how the hell do I figure out what people's instincts were, or my own instincts, or what makes me different from my dad? He's an 8, I'm an 8, but we're totally different. And so those kind of questions made me realize like the material was just not good. I couldn't make any distinctions that were useful for me to be able to figure out why all these people in my life were so different. And so I just started digging, and it took years until I finally came across, John, I think you posted Russ's workshop notes on the instincts, and that was a huge aha moment for me to see like sexual isn't one-to-one, it's attraction. And that opened up a whole new door for me, and it sort of make sense of why the hell I couldn't focus on making money, even though like high school dropouts or, making a bunch of money. Like, I've been trying to like, why is it that I can't focus on these certain things? I couldn't make sense of my instincts, and that was a huge life changer for me. Like, I think figuring out that I was a sexual type, not just figuring out that I was a sexual type, because most people start out the Enneagram thinking they're a sexual type, but like, what does that actually mean? What are the implications of being a sexual type? And I think that has been my orientation to the Enneagram. Is it's not just knowing what your type is, like, what are the implications as to what are the kind of life path you're on, the sort of weaknesses you have, the sort of strengths that you have. That's sort of the way I think about this stuff. So that's been really major. I think that's probably the most significant typing for me, was my instinct stacking, or my instincts. Later on tri-type, but that was huge, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning, and I have my workshop teacher hat on or whatever, but a lot of the definitions and perspectives that we have on the instincts are super different from anything else that's out there, I would say.
Yeah.
And so that's something to know. We don't think, sexual is one-on-one intimacy, for example, and we can talk about that another time. But, we mentioned tri-type directly or indirectly a few times. And some people who are new to the Enneagram aren't familiar with that. And it's this idea that was called Trifix by Oscar Chaza, who's the guy who synthesized a lot of different, mostly ancient systems to create the modern Enneagram of personality. He he had 108 what are called enneagons. And 4 of them, the passions, fixations, holy ideas, and virtues, became the modern Enneagram, along with the instincts is another his contributions. But he came up with this thing, tri-type, recognizing that we have a dominant type, but and that dominant type is located in either the body center, the heart center, or the mental center. But that when we, like, let's say I'm a feeling type, I'm a 4, and that's where I spend most of my time. But when I inhabit my mental center, my thinking style is in the style of either 5, 6, or 7, one of the mental types. For me, it's 5. And then when I'm engaged in my body center, it's in the style of one of the body types, 8, 9, or 1. So my tri-type, or Oscar Chazzo called it trifixation, is 4, 5, 8. And so when we put those numbers together, that's what we're referring to. But piggybacking off of that, one of the main distinctions, I think, in terms of the way the 4 of us look at type is we put a lot of consideration on the relationship of the centers, the body, the heart, and the mind, and how the reason there's 9 types is because they emerge out of the interaction and the dysfunction between those 3 centers of intelligence.
Yeah, and tri-types can give such a different flavor to the core type, and I think that trips a lot of people up.
Mm-hmm.
That's
a
a
reason
huge
for a lot
topic.
of mistyping.
Yeah, that is a huge topic.
How is that, David? Can you say more about how it's a big opportunity for mistyping?
Well, just, I mean, using the example, say, of a 3, a 3 that's, for example, a 3, 5, 9 is a 3 that has 2 withdrawn types, in their tri-type, and then a 3, 7, 8 would have 2 more assertive types, so it'd be triple assertive. Those are just going to be radically different, expressions of 3. They sort of have a chemical influence on each other, or it's almost like alchemy or metallurgy, where you put in just a small amount of one other ingredient and it completely changes some of the basic characteristics of how the style gets expressed, and it tamps some things down and it accentuates and augments certain things. I mean, similarly, like if you've got an 8, for example, who's got 3 and 6, then that's an 8 that needs a considerable amount of acceptance, from other people, which is something we don't generally associate with type 8. So things like that, I mean, they're pretty radically different, really, each of the tri-types. And
so sometimes what I'm hearing you say is that sometimes one aspect of this is that it goes against our preconceived ideas about how a type looks.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Yeah, I mean, it could, well, I mean, especially, again, like going back to, say, a 3 with a 4 wing that has 5 and 9, that's, a lot of withdrawn stuff, and the interests are going to be different. The life themes, I'd even say, are going to be different from someone who's a 3, 7, 8, and so on. So yeah, that whole go-getter, performer, sort of athletic, if you will, figuratively speaking, type of 3 is going to be very different with a 3, 5, 9 or something, right? So
I posted a video once because I'd recorded a video for typing, and I watched the video, and I was kind of surprised that I didn't look very 8ish at all. I looked very withdrawn, and so I thought it'd be funny to post that video in one of the forums that we're members of, just to see what people would say, because I didn't really think anybody would guess my type, and that's exactly what happened. I think most people thought I was some kind of 5 or a 4, because those are types that are in my tri-type, and for an 8, especially an 8 wing 7, that's as withdrawn as it gets, and especially with social blind. It's very few people are going to guess that. And even if you do guess it, you're probably going to think I'm an 8 wing 9 because
Right.
he seems really chill. He doesn't seem chaotic at all.
So I mean, you have a 5 and a 4,
Mm-hmm.
your heart center and your mental center.
Right.
So, but you're also, 8 wing 7 is a pretty out there energetic type. So
Right.
how do you reconcile that or like experience that?
Well, I would say that 8 wing 7 is external in a lot of activity in making things happen. It's for 8s. I noticed like 8 wing 9s can get into just they do less, or it's 8 wing 9s I've noticed can do this thing where they can become authors. They can kind of just stay in, or even like something like staying with one activity for a long time, like playing an instrument. Whereas 8 wing 7s are just a little bit more activity oriented, like making external things happen. And so with 5 and 4, I've always been, my whole life, I always felt like I've always been impressed by assertive types that just were making a lot of things happen in the world. But I always found myself going towards topics that were too internal, way too internal. Like just the Enneagram always felt like a useless hobby where part of me is obsessed about this thing and I'm spending weekends and weekends staying at home, just tinkering with this shit. Where there's this other part of me that is like, you need to create this large operation that's going to make millions. And I mean, I'm serious. Like there was a point in my life where I thought, I'm going to be like an extremely famous person and make millions of dollars. I don't know how this is going to happen, but there's this part of me
Podcast,
that
baby. You're doing it right now.
This is the beginning.
there's a part of me that feels like there is no limit to how big I can get, even though I don't know how the fuck that is going to happen. And I'm interested in these, kind of useless things. But what it means, I guess, how I've been able to reconcile it as I've grown and understood things is that I make big things happen, but it's about internal subjects. It's like taking 8 wing 7 energy, which is just kind of an explosion, a bomb, kind of, but pointing it into topics like the Enneagram, internal topics. And so what that means is the impact that I have in the people in my life is that I kind of pull them down into these worlds of the Enneagram or all these inner subjects in ways that completely change everything. I mean, my best friend OD, I've I've introduced to a lot of topics like the Enneagram or Michael teachings that have completely revamped the way he looks at himself and his life direction. Like I don't want to say like I've changed this person's life, like a perspective that can completely turn everything upside down. And so the way I look at myself now is that I can create these sort of inner experiences. They could be creative experiences, that could be uh, something related to inner work experiences that are like a visceral experience that completely changes the way a person can look at themselves internally. So it's big 8 energy, but it's pointed completely internally. So creating those kinds of experiences, it's like it's to me it feels like opposites, but I think I understand what the hell I am now.
Yeah, I mean, when we were hanging out and I did a breathwork session with you, the 8 was startlingly apparent in not only the amount of energy that was expressed in your session, but in terms of just like the energetic structure of your centers and also in your body. It was like really fucking 8. Um, the way that you related to your heart center
Mm-hmm.
and the sense of how you understood and processed emotion and vulnerability was like, whoa, this is an 8.
Yeah.
How did you
Yeah.
experience that, John? It's going to be really abstract, I assume, but is there a way to illustrate what you sensed?
Yeah, so I mean, so I have 6 years of training in something called integrative breath work, which is sort of similar to holotropic breath work, but it's individualized. And did a session with Emeka, and it was like, so first of all, it was really fucking long. Like it was like an hour and a half.
I didn't realize.
It was really long. It was like, I mean, you know, your background in wrestling came up a lot,
Did it?
but
Oh yeah, it did. It did.
yeah,
It did.
but I felt like I was wrestling for an hour and a half. There was just a way that I mean, first of all, you have, and I don't know how, I'm not going to try to get too personal, but I know that a lot of your relationship with your dad factored in his attempts to dominate you.
Yeah.
And your way of holding boundaries, like it's closer to the chest than a lot of 8s are, but there's a really thick armoring, especially in your chest and shoulders. And so when you were breathing and we were able to get to some of that, I just remember like an enormous amount of energy coming out. So I was on one hand expressed like, you were screaming a lot. But there was a lot of like, I don't know if you remember this, but you'd be like, ah, and then you'd be silent, and then you'd, ah, and I had to use all my body weight to push against you.
Yeah.
And it was in the pushing with me that you felt most met, I think.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And there was a whole thing about grief and how rarely you cry. And when I met you with that intense pushing, there was something in your heart that released, and you experienced some grief that from from what I remember,
Yeah.
that you kind of keep in the background.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy that I felt like I needed to break through to something, and I didn't. And you figured out that idea of pushing against, and as that was happening, it felt like something opened up in my heart that just couldn't open up before, which is just crazy because it's just like expelling that much energy was what opened me up, which is a very 8 thing, I'm sure.
Yeah,
it really fits with the idea of challenger.
Yeah.
That's what that word comes up around 8, and that in a sense, 8s are challenging because they want to be challenged at some deeper level, right? And it may be to actually reveal, you know what I mean? Ultimately, yeah, at some essence level.
Yeah, absolutely.
No.
I get that. Like, I realize one thing I figured out about my 8ness is that there always has to be some level of combat in my life to some degree. Like I've tried to explain this to OD because he has anger as well, but his comes out in really surprising ways. And I've told him that it's, for me, I figured out that you have to expel some of this anger on a consistent basis. Like some form of violence has to be expelled consistently before it gets pent up, and then you start beating the shit out of somebody for no reason.
Yeah.
Not actually, but just like taking it out on someone because it's just been pent up. So I've recognized that on some level you have to have some level of combat or conflict on an ongoing basis. That's just normal. And for me in the past, it used to be wrestling or just any sort of combat was good. It really makes me calm and relaxed when I get to push up against something, or it could just be getting into a debate on a forum and taking it out on somebody, arguing or something like that. where it's not too crazy. So combat that's a consistent thing. And I realized that growing up in my family, that it was a good thing. Just like we always argue about every little thing, and it wasn't a big deal, but it sort of makes you a calm person when you can just duke it out, on a
Well,
regular basis.
I think what you're speaking to, and I think this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning, in terms of the self-help culture and Christianity, all this kind of stuff, is and just American culture in general, is that
Oh yeah.
America is a very aggressive culture, but it's not very healthy at expressing aggression. So there's like a lot of aggression, but it doesn't get channeled and expressed. And I think part of growing and inner growth is not suppressing aggression or seeing aggression as a problem, which I think is an implicit bias in a lot of inner work and related kind of paths, but that you have to learn how to actually own and harness your aggression, but it has to be done creatively rather than as something you're resisting in yourself or denying or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've mentioned this before, but growing up in Nigeria, and traveling, I've definitely noticed that American culture is probably one of the most passive aggressive cultures.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to even figure this out as a social blind. Just there's a huge cultural difference in that a lot of cultures, people just say what they mean, or they'll call you out, and it's not even it's not a malicious thing to just say what you think. Like, if you look at European culture, like French people come over here to work a lot, and German people, and people are experience them as overly too blunt. And that's just American culture. People don't really say what they think, at least compared to other cultures. And so African culture, people would probably feel that, man, like Nigerians are really, really blunt. And I think that's a cultural difference. And I see how that plays itself out in the Enneagram world, in that in the culture I grew up in, you would want to know if you were mistyped. If you got it wrong, that you would want to be corrected. But here it's seen differently, that, oh, you don't want to impinge, you don't want to step on anybody's toes and upset anyone with negativity. They might be wrong. People don't want to be corrected. They see mistyping or staying in the wrong type as part of the process, which it can be, but like there's an element of not wanting to step on anyone's toes with anything negative. Um, that's a huge cultural difference in my.
Yeah, and in the not to trash the narrative program, they have a lot of great information, and I learned a lot. But one of the big factors in the narrative program is that it's a process. Finding your type is a process. So even if someone is mistyped, we're taught not to really come at them with what we think their actual type is. Um, and that was definitely a big challenge for me during the sessions, was to not kind of tell people, hey, you're not a 4 or you're not an 8. So I think that is definitely ingrained into a lot of the Enneagram culture as well.
I think generally it's pretty useful not to tell people what they are or what you think they are, because I'll get assholes that want to tell me what I am, and generally it's like I know the Enneagram pretty well at this point, and they usually don't know the Enneagram very well, and they're just like, oh, you're a little bit more assertive or whatever than a 4. So I get typed as a 6 sometimes, or a 3. I don't think anybody would mistake me for an 8, but or a 1. These kind of different types, or 5. But like I agree that there was a process of exploration and needing to arrive at it oneself. But I think sometimes that don't type other people orientation can take on such a precious kid gloves kind of quality that
Yeah.
even when somebody says something wildly out of sync about their type, like, for example, fours struggle more with anxiety than with depression. That is not true, and that's not accurate, and it's not useful, and it's not helpful. And so being able to not push back, but even just have a discussion about these kinds of things, I think is really important and kind of lacking in the Enneagram milieu. And part of that makes sense because it is this sort of journey of self-discovery, and there's a lot of needing empathy for oneself. But when you are at a stage, or when somebody is at a stage where they're ready to move from the point of gentle self-accepting to more rigorous self-inquiry, which is like a jump, like it's like, okay, I like, seeing myself through the lens of this type is helping me own, like we talked about with people misidentifying as four. It helps me really own my inability to just be on the ball all the time. It helps me own my feelings. It helps me own my complexity. But that can be that's a period of time that needs to sort of happen for some people. A lot of people have not had the permission to be who and what they are. But then at a certain point, when you're ready to actually try to use the Enneagram for something more than just feeling good about yourself, and you really want to growing requires that kind of a challenge to your habitual point of view, and not just from the outside, but more importantly, you challenging yourself, which means open to critically thinking about even the things that you take as fundamentals about whatever system, whether it's the Enneagram or something else, and being able to critically re-examine, also critically see where the gaps in one's own understanding and knowledge are. Like, for example, I see a lot of people uh, assuming they know what rage, shame, and anxiety are, and the underlying affects of the body, heart, and mental types, and then they'll use the misunderstanding or incomplete view of what those psychological affects are in the ego structure, and they'll go, "Oh, it's not shame, it's sadness," and try to recontextualize it, which maybe a lot of feeling types are sad a lot, and I actually think that there's a big thing there. But what those facets of the personality are is a very specific thing that a lot of people will not understand, and so they won't recognize that I don't really get what this is a reference to. What is the shame, or what is the anxiety, or what is the rage, and how does that actually operate? And maybe I need years more study of myself, not just reading another book. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I I don't know why. I think maybe just the orientation that I came into the Enneagram. I noticed that a lot of people come into it from a standpoint of trying to find an identity,
Mm-hmm.
which means you get really touchy about if anyone even suggests that you might not be the type that you are, even if you figure out that you're not the type that you are, it becomes this very personal upheaval of who the hell am I now that I'm not a four. Um, I think because I was so externally focused about the system and I was trying to like understand how do I make good distinctions, it made it easier for me to just not take it personally. And I think a lot of people just aren't there yet in terms of curiosity about what this stuff means, because for a long time I couldn't even post on forums. I couldn't see myself posting on forums because I just didn't think I knew enough. There was just so much depth that there wasn't any way that I could speak about this um, on any forum, because I knew that there was so much that I didn't know. And I just don't think most people are there yet where they're really curious about what any of this stuff means. And it's just a lot of surface level stuff that they're going off of for identity, or like taking it pretty personally. So I think that's a big part of it, that people just aren't curious enough about this stuff yet.
David,
Yeah,
did you? Sorry, Nancy.
you're fine. I was just going to say that I think part of it is that the information that's being put out on the interweb is very surface level information.
Yeah.
And it's very much like, your zodiac sign or etc.
David, I wanted to ask you, did you mistype initially or anything like that?
No, I didn't. The woman that first mentioned the Enneagram to me, and I think gave me a book initially. It came up because I was talking about numerology, because I've been into all kinds of woo-woo kooky stuff since I was a kid, astrology and things like that. And I was talking about numerology one day, and she mentioned, and I was talking specifically about the number 4, because it's a number that comes up a lot for me, and it's a lucky number, 4 and 44, and I was just talking about that phenomenon. And she brought up the Enneagram. It's almost not related in a way, but so I assumed she I guess wisely didn't say anything about what she thought about my type. I think she might have had a sense that I was a 9. She was a 4 with a 5 herself, social self-pres. And so I looked at the book, trying to remember which one it is. I'll look that up at some point. But yeah, when I looked at the 4, because I assumed that that's why she was telling me that. And, I could see some stuff, but then when I read the 9 chapter, it was just obvious right then. So yeah, that's how that went. And my friend, my bandmate and longtime friend, is a 4, and so actually, it's interesting. I was having a lot of envy of him being a 4, right? Because at that point, this is, when was this? Late 80s or something? I can't remember. 4 was the cool type. I guess it is now too. But and so and I've always been creative since childhood, right? And so, I can remember literally complaining, what was it? I don't know. You get to be, I don't know, name any famous whatever artist or whatever, and I'm Walt Disney or whatever, what I mean? Like that. It's like, and it's like, and even the old Riso Hudson books, in their misidentifications, they even make some of those contrasts. They don't bring up people like, Carl Jung as a 9 or stuff like that. So so yeah, that was kind of so I had a bit of a, whatever, a negative self-esteem thing around that he was the quote unquote better type in my mind, right? So
So what is it like envying 4s for 30 years?
it's been
Give
an
us an
incredible
insight.
journey, and now I just think they're all shit. No. Yeah. No, I mean, there is still there is still the idealization of 4 in a certain way, and deepening in the Enneagram, however, of course, and being around my friend for more than 30 years who is a 4, it's not much to envy, ultimately, that experience. Although the positive traits, there are some essential things there, and I don't even know how to put them into words, that well, just that I appreciate in a certain way. And I've come to understand 9 in a different way, of course, over the course of 30 years. I mean, you go through so much. The Enneagram is so experiential, and you realize that certain people that you admire are 9s, and actually some pretty interesting, impressive people are 9s. And so, yeah, at this point, I'm all thinking I'm a badass, so it's great.
Yeah. Well, I hear you speaking to two things. One is that even though so whatever's written in a book about a type, that's a work in progress. It's like an attempt at a definition, but a type is not the definition written in a book. And that, in fact, a lot of very well respected and established definitions and descriptions are not accurate, or they've got a sliver of something in it, but there's more. Like the Enneagram is not a fully excavated mine. It's something to be mined. And that you can also just read about a type and think what type is even capturing, but it's not like the person you are. It's really the structure of your psyche. And so people's definition of type changes, their impression of what a type even is and means. Like I think Joseph one time pointed out that often for certain types, sometimes our association is based on a person of a type that has that type in their tri-type. And so maybe our views of the types are not always accurate, or it just continues to evolve, and that the Enneagram is still like a wide open field of exploration. And it also, and I think Nancy, you brought this up before on a call that we did. You still, whatever fucking type you are, you're still the same person that you are before you found your type or mistype or whatever. It doesn't change who you are at all.
Yeah, it's the structure, not the contents within the structure, and the contents can vary widely. And
well, you're just the horrible person that you were before you knew the Enneagram.
Yeah.
You are after.
Yeah.
You just now know how horrible you are.
Yeah, you just have a clearer view of how terrible you are.
Yeah.
Man, I've had some weird experiences with people just losing their shit when they've been shown that their type is not like wildly different from what they thought they were, to the point that they leave the Enneagram entirely.
Yeah.
Sort of
Well, I think if you like your type, you're probably mistyped.
Yeah.
Fucking definitely.
I mean, 100%. I hated 3 when I found 3. I was like, oh, fuck me.
Yep.
It sucks.
I'm like, just like my fucking type, sexual self-pres 4-5 with the 5 and 8 tri-type is like
everybody's dream.
It's the weirdly the fucking most mistyped, desired fucking type.
Yeah.
And it's not that great.
It's freaking mystical.
It blows my mind how much I see people like I remember recently somebody, like, I caught them talking shit about me on some thread, and they're like, his interpretation of Enneagram is not dark enough. He was really a 4-5-8 to be dark. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what Enneagram are you looking at? It's like there's this just like, I'm not a like, there's no, like, every Enneagram type is a person. It's not a cartoon.
Yeah, that stuff is crazy to me. And it's, on one hand, people think, oh, this 4-5-8 is like super dark, like Dark Lord. But then you have all these people that are identifying with that type who are not even like
super sunshiny
of that.
Yeah.
Super sunshiny people. Yeah.
Totally. Like they're like, bodies are made of milk cream.
I'm in my business suit. I'm a 4-5-8.
Yeah.
Their LinkedIn profile, and
right. That's why I love.
Go ahead.
That's why I've met, like, anytime I hear someone say 4-5-8, I pull out the H.R. Giger paintings, just throw them out there, and just watch the horror.
Yeah.
This is what you're trying to identify with.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, the way I weed out 4s is just saying 4s are the most fucked up type. And if someone reacts to that negatively, I'm like, all right, you're not a 4.
Yep.
Simple as that.
That's a good way, actually. Yeah.
Because 4s will be okay with that. They'll be 100% okay with that.
Yeah.
And I have met so many 4s in my travels where I am like you are nowhere close to a 4. They're like, I have dark feelings. I'm like, that's cute.
You know, it's not having a super ego around how I should feel or the kinds
Right.
of feelings that are acceptable or what these like there's not a lot of anxiety around what these feelings mean about me because even though the fourth thing is who am I, uh, there is a way in which the four is greedy for what the heart is going to reveal about who I am. So I sort of think of the four is like I'm going to be as true to my heart as possible. Uh, but the thing about it is, and this is a whole discussion on like the heart center. Um, when I was teaching the retreat last week, I was saying about one of the main differences in the centers is that you can be disassociated from your body, but you're still sort of using your body, and you can be dissociated from your mind, but you're still, even if it's full of chatter, it's still kind of there in its fucked up form. But a lot of people can function without any contact with their heart. Um, there might be a lot of like emotional reaction, which is different than being actually in touch with your heart. But the heart is like you can't make the heart do anything. You have to, and I think this is a good reason why, especially assertive types have a difficult time being with their heart because the heart. I compared it in the retreat. It's kind of stupid, but it's kind of like a cat, and you walk into a room and you're like, "Come here, cat." The cat is going to run the fuck away.
Mm-hmm.
But if you kind of approach it by the side and are a little bit indirect with it and give it space to be curious about you, it reveals itself. It comes to you. And so it's like the heart is the same thing where you got to, it has its own time, pace, and logic and its own process. And you have to be receptive to it. And I think that the four personality is oriented to try to do that. But the problem is that like to contrast it with a three, I think threes are like, all right, between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m., I'm ready to be with my heart. The heart going to show up for the appointment? Oh, the heart is 10 minutes late. Maybe we got to go on to the next thing.
That's the
the heart.
heart
Oh,
as a
that's too
dog.
accurate,
That's the
John.
heart as a dog instead of a cat.
Yeah, the heart is not efficient.
Too
right?
accurate.
The heart
But
isn't
threes
efficient.
are efficient.
Threes are efficient, but their heart is not so much. So they're like, all right, well, I
No.
scheduled you to be here on Thursday at 4:00, and you're not, But with the four, it's like, I'm going to be as true to my heart as possible. But it's still grasping for the heart. It's still being like, come here, cat. Because, it's like I'm drawing everything from my heart. And, you know, like I think really healthy fours are able to express what's real in their heart no matter how much the outer forces are opposing them or against them. It's like fours can be very like honestly, vulnerably self-revealing and being true to what's real for them in the face of whatever. But when they're unhealthy, it's like grasping for the heart. And the same way, the heart is not receptive to that grasping. So the way that the four tries to feel their heart is through reaction. Like trying to being upset about things or being in response, like picky or aesthetically whatever,
Disdainful or something.
disdainful. But what that does is like that sort of there's a certain like kind of fidelity that if the four is healthy enough, they can learn what real fidelity to their heart means. But that fidelity also means that there's not a lot of there's very little judgment about what is coming up for me. They might hate themselves, but it's not like if I'm like pissy or I hate something or I'm feeling disgusted by this or if I hate you, there's not any judgment about that. It just is what it is.
Yep.
And so a lot of people that are first introduced to the Enneagram that do have the issues around accepting their feeling states, even still, you'll be like, yeah, fours are probably the most negative type from the point of view, just they feel negative all the time, even when they're healthy. And there's a lot of like, no, I'm not. No, I'm a healthy four. There's a kind of a super ego judgment about how I should feel or like what's normal about feeling. Whereas like every four I've ever met is very much like there's no doesn't mean they're expressing their feelings, but there's really no inner censorship around what's coming up for me in terms of my feeling state.
And negative feelings are seen generally as more true, right?
Right. Definitely.
More real.
Yeah. And so you're pointing to the real kind of pitfalls of the modern Enneagram, where they view these negative feelings as being in unhealthy levels, and
Yeah.
the health levels mean everything. So
Well, yeah,
I
what
think that's interesting.
what makes the difference between health and unhealth from like the levels of development point of view is not what is the content of my personality, but how present with it am I? You know, like how much can I contain in presence in my being, and how much can I include and be conscious of what's going on without getting identified with it? If you're present with your personality, you're less identified with it, which means you can use it and you accept what's in your personality. So if your preferences, your likes and your dislikes, all those kinds of things are just part of the program. And it's not about getting a better program or a better personality, which is a very valid and important part of certain kinds of work. When it comes to the Enneagram work, primarily it's not about improving and getting a better personality. It's about learning how to be more awake, conscious, and embodied amidst the functioning of your personality.
When people talk about health on forums, I feel like they're using the term that they would refer to in a relationship. Like, this relationship is
Yeah.
healthy. I don't think people understand what health means in Enneagramic terms. So they think that sounds really unhealthy, like saying that fours have a negative worldview, because they're saying, well, that's not good. That's not positive. I think what people think when they say healthy, that it implies a positive improvement, that this is going to be an uplifting kind of a thing, which is part of the issue I think we run into with our approach to the Enneagram, or versus the way most people approach the Enneagram, is that there is an overlay of an expectation of a positive outcome, which isn't a bad thing, but it's sort of deleting the possibility that there is a negative aspect of reality that needs to be addressed.
Well, in what you're saying, and David, I'm curious your insight because you've spoken to this before, but there's kind of like a 9 to 3 bias, you know, that line bias in there, because it's sort of like, you know, if we assume archetypally that we have this kind of I mean, there's a lot of nines out there, but there's also this sort of, a lot of spiritual work can be experienced through a nine-ish lens, and then the view of health then becomes almost unconsciously a 3 lens. And so there's a sense of like that sense of health becomes a kind of being a more effective, efficient, uplifting, inspirational person. Do you agree?
There is that, certainly. I think a lot of it, however, is nines deifying their nineness, right? Which is which is to not do 3, which is that to be ambitious, to be results oriented in any kind of overt way would be a bad thing. Although, yeah, I mean, it's complex, and everybody's having a different experience, but yeah, I mean, there's probably a productivity, in other words, a quasi 3-ishness that is revered in 9 relative to, certain practices and those kinds of things. That makes sense. Certain kind of being on a schedule, if you will, of and then there's the fact that there is something to that, to having some kind of inner practice. But yeah, generally, I think I see more of 9s deifying nineness, and a lot of nines mistyping as fours and changing the definition of four to make it empathic and the wise counselor that you could come to with any emotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not that that's also not true with some fours, right? There are plenty of fours that are good sounding boards in that way, and maybe even are more rightfully in the category of people you could take, a really wide spectrum of emotional material to, and there'd be a certain kind of acceptance because there's somewhat maybe a wider range in fours of a wider palette of you know what they can, well, just won't have judgment about, for one thing. Actually, the judgment is more typically about stuff that's super positive, right? Generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking.
How would
Anyway,
you describe the deification of nineness?
well, I mean, it's partly what's been talked about before. I don't know where the term came from. It might have even been me, but I can't remember.
I think
But
it
there's
was.
a premature Buddha.
It was you.
Okay.
Yeah, that was you. That was a 9 move.
That was a 9 move. Yeah, and that was a 9.
Might have
Yeah,
been
that was a
me.
9 for getting his own amazingness. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, 9 is a neurotic. Here's how I'd say it. I don't know if this makes sense. You guys can tell me. Is the neurotic fixation of 9 is partly a mock-up of a spiritual person, a person who's already there, right? So, such as me as a 9 who's premature Buddha, I'm saying, look at everybody overreacting to everything. Everybody's upset. Everybody's angry, anxious, loud, da 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 da. Right. So, whereas me, I'm not those things. Why can't everybody be like that? And a lot of that is coming from the selfishness, the very deeply unconscious selfishness of nines, where you're wanting, you don't want your own equilibrium upset. And so you're kind of wanting to advise people or placate or do whatever to, and sometimes it takes on the role of being a counselor in varying forms of health or neurosis, of kind of wanting everybody to be okay around you, and it can be codependent, and sort of, I picture it as somebody putting foam rubber around the house, right? Who, on all the sharp objects, and making everything okay for everybody so that there's no edges and no pointy corners and things. There's a lot of that dealing with nines, and nines think that everybody should be doing that, and so that is good. So that's what a good person does, right?
Yeah, can you say more about that counselor thing and the kind of the judgment that, like, often people just think of nines as accepting, but man, some of the most exhausting battles
Mm-hmm.
are with fucking nines that just feel
Yeah.
like they need to tell you how you should be.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're talking about online, right? Is that what you're
Yeah.
kind of mainly?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of my themes in forums for a long time now is that nines are actually the worst in these online forums, and it's because, I mean, it's very simple formula. Here's a safe space for a 9 to finally do rage, right? But but then it's a safe space in another way, in that you're just talking about ideas. We're just talking about abstractions, right? So it's doubly safe, right? Because I'm supposedly, well, and I am just in the space of, arguing an abstract concept about Enneagram types or instincts, or or philosophical or political discussions, or whatever the group is. And so that's quote unquote good, right? I mean, we're just trying to get to the truth, so called, right? But then nines get extremely stubborn, contrarian. A lot of nines, there are some nines that just are contrary online. I mean, that's like the whole thing that they do, is to just say, no, you're wrong about that, and elaborate it in some way. So
how does that reconcile with people's usual view of 9 as the peacemaker?
well, I think what's at least one thing that's happening there is, again, it's sort of a blowing off steam, right? Because when you look at those, I assume that when you look at those nasty online nines in their day-to-day life, they're more like a 9, right? And they might even be more 9ish than some other 9s, and that's why there's so much of a release that happens online, in the safe zone of being online. Right? So it's just a shadow spew, basically.
How are we doing on time?
Well, it's Eastern time. It's 10 till 10. I mean,
I should probably get going soon, because
We should
Galore is
probably
making
wrap up.
pasta.
Because we're trying to
just made
record a
pasta.
45-minute episode. We definitely did like an hour and a half. So
yeah.
Well, that gives us a good amount to cut out.
yeah. Okay.
I think it's
it's
gone
all
pretty
shit.
good.
Yeah, it's good.
My intro sucked, but other than that,
I don't think so. I think it was all good. I mean, I apologize for like kind of directing so much, but I kind of like
No, it's good.
No, that was good. We need that.
My Enneagram teacher thing is kind of kicking in.
No, it's good. It's good, because otherwise it's just chaos.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like an FE thing of, all right, we need to get David to talk now. You know, we need to get this person to talk.
I feel that.
And so that's necessary to some degree. And I've seen podcasts that do a structure where they take turns, but it's helpful if there's someone who can take on a role of making sure that everyone is talking and there are certain interesting questions that are being brought up. So yeah, I think that's really good.
Cool. How you doing, Nancy? Effie.
I just remembered my mic was muted, and I was like, "Why are you guys not listening to me?" It's like, what the fuck? No, I thought that it was good that you interjected and kind of took that lead, because I think it's worth noting that the first time we were recording, we kind of all were a lot quieter than we usually are.
I know that was interesting.
It was interesting. I was kind of chuckling to myself the whole time.
Yeah, it's a little weird. It's going to take a few. I think it's going to take a few runs before we're back to our fucking
normal selves.
Yeah. I was having the being on stage feeling.
Yeah, it's like, oh shit, people are going to hear this.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. So I think it was good that you took that role, and I think maybe in the future we should have some like staged questions. So if it gets quiet, we can say, "Hey, here's a question we can talk about," just so that we can kind of bounce off each other a little bit more, because it is going to take some time before we get comfortable with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm naturally sort of comfortable just from my experience in doing this shit all the time now.
For sure. Yeah.
How about this, David? Don't ever say anything about recording. Just ever.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Don't ever say that I'm recording now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Just start. I don't even want to know that that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that will freak me out. It will turn me into a 30. It's terrible. Just don't tell me.
Don't ever say anything about recording. I won't even forget that that's even happening.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's really where this needs to be too, where we're not even remembering and we're just talking. It's
Yeah.
Because
on the phone.
I think this is hilarious. I'm the fucking for the
Yeah.
I mean, you've done this a few times, so shut up.
pulling all of y'all behind me.
I know,
No,
even
it's
the
good.
3 was like a freaking
good.
mute.
Yeah, it's like, where's my 8 and my 3 at? You know?
Nowhere. We're gone. We left.
I tried to do a podcast once with OD years and years ago, and I mean, just because we bullshit all the time, and sometimes he records things without me knowing, and I'll listen back to it, and I'm like, God damn, who was that? And then we tried to do a podcast, and it sucked. And it just took a long time to get comfortable recording. And I think what we've both figured out is that we just record each other without telling the other person.
Yep.
And we end up like coming up with really good stuff. But actually sitting down and saying, we're going to do a podcast and record each other, like it didn't work.
Yeah. It's going to take us some time to get used to it for sure. But I think we'll get there.
And I think what we've done so far, regardless of it not flowing as naturally as our conversations often do, I think will be really interesting for people still.
No, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Like,
and people don't know how we normally talk, so.
Yeah, and I mean, we are kind of just like laying the foundation of what is sort of up for us and important for us and why we're doing it. So, you know, I mean, just talking about like the closet narcissism of 9 just then, you know,
Yeah, that was
people
interesting.
don't fucking hear that, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, even though we're not going like, no, let's talk about the one, we're touching like clearly who anybody listening is going to get the sense and the view that, oh, these guys have something very different and insightful and original to say, you know?
Done.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening to our podcast. We'll be back at you next week. Make sure you follow us, except we don't have any of that shit. So
Everybody should say.
We got to do something more interesting than that.
No, everybody should try to say the same words at the same time.
Yeah, there you go.
So, we'll all try to match each other to say thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Can we do it in a creepy chant voice?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for listening, and to Big Hormone Enneagram.
Okay, all right, let's.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you for listening to
Big Hormone
Enneagram. Hormone Enneagram. Perfect.